I'm on my laptop.
Good day, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to Listen Up. I am your host, Al Neely, and on the other side, we have my man, Thomas Cook. Say hello to everybody, Thomas.
How's everybody doing?
All right. Today, we have with us Miss Shay Malone. She is the owner of 360 Citizens Education Support, which is an educational support provider. Shay has a master's from Regent University, and she achieved her undergrad degree from the University of Hampton, and her degree is in education, special education. She's also been in mental health, academics, education, intervention for over 20 years now. Shay, say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody.
All right. So Shay wanted to come on, and then she wanted to make sure that Thomas and I were well informed as to what causes particular behaviors in young men. So she's definitely going to have to spend some time convincing and enlightening us because, we're from the old school, and we think that you should have a male in the house, and Shay says otherwise. So let's start out by let's Thomas.
Yes.
This is one of your main favorite topics.
I got my military hat on, so I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm ready
to what would be the first question that you have for Ms. Malone?
My first question is, why does it appear, and I'm treading lightly because we have a guest, that many women have an issue with self-accountability? And I want to put an IE in parentheses, and I'll fill in the blank, meaning if you're wrong, then it's like, well, you guys do it too, as opposed to just saying, yes, I must admit I was wrong from a self-accountability standpoint. Is there something in a capacity of the psyche of women that they feel like they have to be on a defense mechanism when men and I'm talking about within a relationship, I'm not even talking about somebody you don't know, when men say, listen, this is what's going on, this is what I find that is happening, I just want you to be aware of it, as opposed to saying, yes, that's true, I did leave panties and curlers and the iron running near water, but you do it too. I'm making it humorous. I'll defer.
Okay, so we're diving right in. That's cool. I don't think it's so much a woman thing as it is an emotional maturity thing.
Okay.
People who have not had safe spaces to be wrong and to be like, for it to be okay for them to be wrong, don't typically deal well with being criticized. And I think a lot of it comes into the situation, the context. Men, I think, tend to operate without the background, the acknowledgement maybe of how patriarchy has operated in life or the experiences that a woman has had with men.
Okay.
So like men will be like, yeah, but I'm different. So why is she so guarded and so defensive and so masculine when I'm different? You don't get to erase all of the experiences before. You have to start where somebody is. And it's up to both partners in a relationship to be able to create a space where people can be addressed about things that are bothering each other without getting defensive. So I would say, are men creating that safe space? Are men acknowledging that whatever history is there? And are we doing a good job choosing emotionally healthy partners?
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So
Go ahead, Al.
what I want to know is, we have young men now that it appears as though, um, well, we all know what the one parent household um, statistics are. They're extremely higher, much higher than they have been during the 50s, 60s, and the 70s. We have more deviant behavior, and we can see some of this playing out in our society with young men. Do you feel like, because there's a lack of a male presence in the household, that has affected this behavior in a way where it's become um, much more frequent?
Oh, so you brought up like the 50s and the 60s and 70s. And so I'm going to bring up integration. I'm going to go historical because the the landscape, especially if we're talking about Black America, the landscape of our communities changed drastically without a lot of support. I call this the age of freedom because I say this generation is the first one where we've been able to address and actually face a lot of the traumas that we've dealt with. Whereas before we were just pushing through and surviving. And so some of what we're seeing is really just the space to fall out. Some of what we're seeing is lack of economic support. Some of what we're seeing is lack of positive cultural representation. So if you think about like the 80s, the media that we had in the 80s, the shows that we had, a lot of it was positive representation. Whereas I would say late 80s through now, a lot of it's about being violent, being aggressive, being overly sexual. Um, and so just having a male presence in the home is not necessarily going to address that. I think we should talk about why there are so many men who aren't in their children's lives. But also, I think we need to recognize that, again, Black America, Black men were found to be the most highly involved father figures in their children's lives across
Recent?
Really?
races.
Is that
Yes,
recent?
that is recent.
Okay. Um, I'm not going to challenge that statistic, but I do want to retort a little bit of the 80s representation. What I mean by that is, I want to assume you're talking about Cosby Show type of scenario when that
Cosby
first
Show,
came out, right?
positive hip hop, Hill, Different World,
Sure,
even a
sure.
lot of family oriented shows.
No, absolutely. I don't want to retort what you said. I'm in agreement with that. What I want to retort is um, the fact that what Al is saying when he says a male in the household, he's not just talking about a a human being in general. He's talking about someone who absolutely has some form of leadership skill, some form of vision for the household, and that he has cooperation within that household, meaning his spouse or significant other believes in this particular person as someone who will be a provider, protector, and has the propensity to um, drive, at best, a vision for the household that's going to be positive. Am I correct, Al? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
For the most part.
All right. So
Yeah.
what we're starting to see, I'm going to say irresponsibly, is that women, whether coming from a single household or a two-parent household, are definitely being programmed uh, in the promotion of boss chick, uh, independence. I don't need a man. Those three things. Too, at worst, in millennial age, I'm over 55, so I don't hear that as much in my cipher, but I do see this visually with respect to what you're saying, imagery, media, and what we were trying to say, I believe, I and Al, was we have to fight that as a narrative now, because it will only grow more divisive if we don't say, hey, listen, there's a reason why there was a structure to the household where man was the head. It was beyond biblical. Some of it was relative to even physicality, that if you trust in relationship with the partner that you're with, um, he would be the person that would be out hunting, gathering, providing, building, and that as the female within the relationship, or the woman within the relationship, forgive me, that just the nurturing portion is as important, especially if you have children. And somehow we've segued away from what the true meaning of, especially marriage, and I'm not afraid to say marriage. I'm married. I'm a proponent of marriage. I've actually done it twice. Okay. But at the same time, I recognize within my marriage that my spouse is as strong as anyone I know. But she also understands the dynamic of headship. And when I say it in that capacity of submission, she allows my vision to be encompassed with her vision, that we're partners in that. Her indifference is for her own protection. And I'm going to use something that actually a former pastor of mine, who happened to be a woman, said to us as a congregation. She said, to be in authority, yet under authority, is soul protection. I didn't get it until I made a mistake in the office of our administrative. And what it means is this: me as the man, me as the husband, I will take the heat or the hit for any risk that we take, whether we refinance the house, whether we decide to purchase another property, whether we start a new business. You are there in support to add wisdom to the vision. You know what I mean? You are there as a support to not necessarily be uh, indivisible or even invisible, but to continue to lead as you lead. Is there any probability that women in today's society could accept a role of nurturer as a strength, as opposed to saying that, well, I don't want anybody bossing me around? I think that's where emotional intelligence comes in. If you
Tom,
choose, am I going too far?
well, back up a little, or move your mic back a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, and then you asked a lot of stuff there, so you
Right.
got to give her a chance
There's
to
a
answer.
lot of layers here.
let me,
So
I'll put a
you
pin in.
gotta
Let
give
me
her a
just
chance
stop.
to
You
answer a question.
take one at a time.
A lot of layers here. All right. So since we're gonna go biblically,
Okay.
right? All right. So this for From my perspective, this is to me a lot like when certain people want to make America great again, right?
Mhm.
We want to make
Okay.
marriage great again, right? Except if you look throughout the Bible, marriage was not great. When we talk
Yeah.
about women being accountable, if we're going to talk about male headship, we have to talk about the fact that men are ultimately responsible, right? Eve ate the fruit. Had Adam not eaten the fruit, also, would we be in the position we're in today? It was Adam's responsibility to decide whether or not to lead or to follow. Okay?
So
Submit
basically,
ye.
you're saying he chose to follow. Go ahead. Go ahead. I
He
like
chose
this
to
shit.
follow.
Go ahead.
He was the one who was given the command.
Gotcha.
He was given the direct command, and he chose to disobey.
Gotcha.
No, she chose to disobey.
She
Go
wasn't
ahead.
But
given
he,
the command.
She was given the command by
The
him.
command was not given to her.
She didn't follow his instruction, but I'll defer.
Again, ultimate. If you're gonna do headship,
Right.
you have to take ultimate responsibility. You can't say, and this is exactly what Adam said. But this woman you gave me, you can't do that. You can't say I want headship and then blame the woman for not doing what she was supposed to do.
all
Second,
right. Okay.
submit ye to one
Wow.
another. Okay? So if we're going to talk about submission and headship, we're going to talk about the responsibility of submission, right?
Mhm.
I think that women will submit when they are treated properly.
So, what is your definition of proper, Shay?
So do y'all know around when women were allowed to have bank accounts?
Oh yeah, I know that those things just that fries me. So
Yeah, and so this
it's
this is what I'm saying. We can't separate, and that's why I said it's like make America great again. You can't separate what's going on currently from centuries of women
yeah
not being allowed to have their own autonomy.
yeah yeah. It's the way this country was designed. It was designed for white men with power. Women and I can't understand why they continue to vote with that political group, but
Oh,
they
there's a
fought.
whole psychology behind it.
Yeah, the 1920s is when there was really strides made for women, and then it's continued. But as you can see now, the landscape is such that they're not even able to make decisions about their own bodies. So
Well, to this
we've
very
taken a
day,
step back.
even
But
even
I
before
don't want to
Roe
get
v.
off the
Wade,
point. Yeah, I don't
even
definitely.
before Roe v. Wade, if a woman goes to the doctor and she says, I don't want to have any children, most women in this country will hear, you're too young to make that decision. We need your husband's permission. Okay. Or we'll have to see. You have to have 2 or 3 kids before you can make that decision.
Okay. Um, I got your point. And I see what you're trying to say, Thomas, as well. Um, I think I'm trying to figure out how or what can be done so that, give you a typical example of what I'm trying to say. Um, One of my close friends, well, several of my close friends, they're in the household with their sons. And there is a big difference um, pretty much where the father is in the household and the behavior of the son um, when it comes to respecting authority, when it comes to learning. There's obviously there's always exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, um, when the father is in the household, those young men tend to grow up and be respectful. They tend to accomplish more. And thought when you and I were talking before you came on, you said that that is not the main reason. Am I correct? You're saying it has to do with education. Am I correct or wrong? So straighten me out here if you need to.
So I'll share. My observation has been that children do respond differently to male authority than they do to female authority. And this has been across the board. Okay. So
Mhm.
I very much think that that is a thing. I think that it is designed, the original design is for a child to have balance, right?
Yeah, and
To have
that's what we're
right,
always talking about with Thomas and JT and Joel and all. So that's a thing with us. Go ahead. We think that's
right,
important. Go ahead.
to have balance.
Right.
Um, I think, however, just like there are many women who are successful, when we measure success by academics or by income or by job and not by quality of relationships and emotional responsivity and maturity, then we miss out on a whole big picture. So I would say that I think it does make a difference. I think the quality, I think children generally will be as mature as their parents
Okay.
and as respectful as their parents.
You're saying
Okay.
within a single parent home, there's no difference between the single parent home, and I'm talking especially for male children, than a two parent home.
I will say that the odds of male children being emotionally successful and successful in life are greater in a healthy single parent household than they are in a toxic two parent household.
Oh well,
Okay.
we would
All
all
right.
be in agreement in
But
that case.
well,
Yes.
here's the thing. Here's the thing.
Uh-huh.
Here's what I think people choose to go by like their environment, like their circle. So emotionally mature men are more likely to have emotionally mature circles. And so, from that perspective, if you're around a bunch of men who are involved with their children, they're not cussing out people, they're not abusing substances, they're not abusing their children or their partners,
Right.
then that feels like what's mostly happening. But
Mhm.
statistically, what we see over and over again is that by and large, men are the perpetrators of violence in the home.
Black men, you mean?
So
I'm saying men,
men
period.
in general. Okay.
Men.
Okay.
All right. I never looked at it like that, Thomas. But I guess from the standpoint, that's from that standpoint, we're alike, right? You're like that. Joel's like that. JT, Tony, Anthony, Paul. I guess that's kind of where we run, right?
Well,
So
we're
I
coming
never
from a
thought about
certain
that.
we're
Yeah.
coming from a certain era. I want to say
Right.
that. I don't know if we can mix in demographic because I think we all started off. I mean, we're probably middle to upper middle class financially,
Makes a
but
difference.
but the but we all started at ground zero. You know what I mean? Most of us had it the scale of economics. Our parents were considered poor or lower, middle. You understand what I mean? In that regard. So, but
Yeah.
I do
Gotcha.
what you made an excellent point, Shay, that given the odds or the option of single parenthood or toxic two parenthood, then single parenthood would opt better. That part I get. That part I get. How about this? And I'll put it in. This is not a slant or anything like that. Relative to relationships,
There's a
is
lot of
there?
reverb from your mic, Thomas. I don't
It
know how
is.
you can fix it. Yeah. I don't know. Move it back or something or
I'll move it back and I'll
all
turn
right.
it down.
Okay.
And matter of fact, I'll just sit back. Is there any probability?
That's not helping. So that doesn't help either. Yeah. It's maybe bring it closer. I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, I'm turning it down.
Bring it closer. Try that.
All right. Can you hear me? Is that a little better?
Yeah, but let's see if it just get reverb from it. Just keep going.
All right. Is there who makes the decisions with respect to relationships? Would you say it's men or women?
I think it depends on the relationship.
Okay. I've always, in my interpretation, that men are definitely the pursuers, but women are the gatekeepers. That's the way I see it. It's like, you have to get her permission in order for a relationship to continue. Would you be agreeable in that capacity, that usually men would have been the pursuers for a relationship, or at least to have relations? Because I know men, we definitely are more visual, so as opposed to more emotional when it comes to pairing and coupling.
I would say probably that would be the most common pattern.
Okay. And that's where I was talking about, Al, with respect to emotional intelligence. And not a slander, but just a filter with respect to when we talk about coupling, when we talk about decision making with respect to having children, especially multiple children, in a situation where you see the history of someone who is not either not providing, or at least not providing a safe space for a woman, where does that fall in the realm of whose responsibility is that?
I would say if you're going to go with the headship model, it's always the man's ultimate responsibility. And so this falls under what are young men being told? Who is pulling them aside and explaining to them that they are more than their sexual parts, right? That their only job is not to conquer or to get as much as they can. Like there's responsibility, there's more to life than getting it in. And so we don't see a lot of that. We don't see a lot of people. I actually would say that for men, I have the utmost empathy because, so like you just said, men are less emotional. It's not true. This is not a true story. Men are no less emotional than women,
Okay.
right? But they're cultured differently. One of the most heartbreaking memories I have is I was in a store and this little boy either my kid was crying or this little boy had started crying. Either way, the little boy was like 8 or 9. And he was like, men's don't cry.
We've
You're
heard
8.
that.
You're 8. You're
We've
9.
we've heard that.
Right. And this is what I'm saying. Men are not often allowed to have their full expression, their full humanity. Okay. And so when you think about relationships and coupling, and men often have a very limited vision of what their role is. Men are nurturers, just as women are nurturers. They may nurture differently, but men have just as much of a desire for family. They have just as much joy in children, but we have people who, because of our cultural ideals, they're not allowed to play with toy kitchens. They're not allowed to play with dolls because that's not manly. But then we expect them to be good fathers. We don't listen to their feelings but then we expect them to be able to manage them. We haven't given them any guidance. We haven't taught them that they have multiple feelings, that there are levels of feelings, that they can express those feelings. And so a lot of men often end up between two feelings. They can either be happy or angry. That's it. That's all you get.
agree. I'm gonna agree.
That's all you get.
I'm gonna agree. And Al,
And
no, please go ahead. I'm
well, I
sorry.
was just gonna say, and when you're limited in that way,
Mhm.
you get a lot of depression, substance abuse, anxiety, aggression,
Mhm.
and also women do play into this. Okay?
Mhm.
Single parent households do play into this a lot of times, either because of the way they were raised, because women get raised pretty harshly too, in a lot of instances, where they're expected to bear the burden of everything and deal with it, whatever it is,
Right.
right? And so now they're raising these young men, and they don't know that we're supposed to allow children to have a voice. They don't know that we're supposed to allow children to express themselves. They've fallen into these ideals of what masculinity looks like. So they're telling their little boys, do this, do that, do this. You're the man of the house. You're not allowed to cry. And these young boys angry because they have nowhere to express themselves.
Right.
I don't want to lose this thought. So I want to go back to a few things, but this one. So when you're taking a look at it and you look at it from that standpoint, let's just say there's, I've seen or I've heard circumstances where a young man has been pulled over and he's by a police officer. And he'll ask the police officer, why'd you pull me over? And the police officer may be from a different generation. He gets offended. But the younger person, the young man, is looking for answers as to why. Would you say that would be an example of those two ideologies in conflict with one another? Someone looking for answers, and they were taught that they could perhaps ask questions to figure out why. But you have someone who's older and they like, you're challenging me.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're challenging me, it's disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
So is that why would you say that's where we have these issues with society? Maybe those
One,
particular things.
I would say that mostly it is way less children that are being raised to be allowed to question.
Now,
Absolutely. I mean,
less.
I don't mean less than before. I mean, it's more than before, but it's still a minority.
Okay. Yeah, because
Okay.
it
Children are
wasn't even a
still
question
by and
growing up for me.
large being, well, and you have to consider this coming from slavery, coming from Jim Crow, questioning authority was life or death. Okay. So parents, in order to save their children's lives, were very harsh.
Gotcha.
And so now we have more space, right? And so we do have more that feel able to question. There's a difference between questioning reasonable authority and being rebellious and belligerent. Rebellion and that kind of what are you going to do to me attitude, that comes from not being heard. Children who are taught to question and reason are usually often taught as well that there is reasonable authority. And so you don't just see it with police, you see it in classrooms, right? You see it in homes. And it's how authority teaches children to engage with authority.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
That's a good point. Very good point. I think that, well, let me just segue and say this. I like you, Shay, and this is killing me. I had a narrative of saying I'm going to be like the retort button, but now you're making too much sense. So you threw me off script. So Al, I'm going to be quiet for 3 minutes till I get myself together. All right.
Okay. Let me. That's plenty. I got quite a few things.
Go ahead.
So I wrote down something, Shay. If you could give me the definition of mental toughness and tell me if it is different for cultures or demographics and sexes, or is it the same thing across the board? Because give me the definition of mental toughness, and then I'll ask you the second and third part of the question.
Okay, so when you said mental toughness, I think what that translates to is like in mental health, we have this concept of resilience, right? How well you can bounce back from or deal with difficulties. It's also adaptability, flexibility. All of these are part of like how well you can cope with life's obstacles. Okay. Is it different? I think it is different in genders. Okay.
Okay.
I think
why is that? Tell me.
I think girls tend to be more internal. But I think girls also tend to have more outlets. So resilience is built from having support. Mental toughness is built from having support when you encounter trouble. The less support you have, the less resilience you have. And so what people may do that looks like they're doing really well is they may shut down completely internally, right?
Yeah.
And they're just working their way through life, but they're not actually engaged. They're not actually actively being themselves. They're going through the motions of life to protect themselves from dealing with anything else.
Gotcha. Another question. So I'm sitting down with Thomas or I'm with Tony, and we're talking about, man, we can't understand why that kid is acting like this, and or he did that, and it doesn't make sense. Are we looking at it basically? I mean, we're different people, but we all have a similar view. Therefore, would you say it's difficult for us to see it from the perspective of somebody that, like Thomas said, we're either middle class or upper middle class, somewhere in there? That someone that might not have might be lesser educated or don't have the financial ability to have counseling or mental health or any of those things. So do you think that is possible, that that's what we're doing?
I think it's highly likely. I think that
gotcha.
when we're not aware of so like in race, we talk about white privilege, and most people who are non-white don't have any trouble understanding white privilege because you know the difference, right?
Right.
We don't talk as much about class privilege, right? And a lot of our systems are designed for people who have resources.
Yes.
So, for example, in Virginia Beach, our public transportation system has to be literally one of the worst public transportation systems I've ever encountered.
Yes, absolutely.
The bus in the neighborhoods, not the main streets, but in the neighborhoods, the buses, last time I checked, stopped running at like 6 o'clock at night. People don't even get off work until 6. It takes 2 hours to go 20 minutes. And so I think when you're not conscious.
You mean 2 miles? 20 minutes to go 2 miles.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
But when you're not conscious of these challenges, when you haven't dealt with them, or when you haven't been actively involved in someone's life who's faced them, it's really hard to understand. It's really hard for me to understand what it's like to be constantly under the threat of trauma or fear of death in my neighborhood because I've never had that experience. But I can recognize that I've never had that experience, and there's a hopelessness that goes with that.
Gotcha.
And so the behavior is different because there's not a future orientation. I don't have a concept of myself as a 25-year-old or as a 40-year-old because none of my friends have made it past 17 without being dead or in jail.
Yeah. Gotcha. Hmm. Thomas?
Yeah,
You're
I
ready now. I don't want to cut you out. Man.
no, it's
Say
fine.
something.
I want to get this one in because what would be, and this was a talking point when we did the Jada Pinkett or Smith piece.
He wants to throw a fastball before the innings
I
are
listened to that one.
I hear that was the one that triggered you. So
I listened to that one. I
want to
had
make
feelings.
certain that our producer has some real work to do. So let me squeeze this one in. What is your definition of toxic masculinity? Because a lot of gentlemen like myself and Al really took offense to that label being thrust upon almost every man that questioned anything about what they would either expect from their wife, partner, or women in society to do. I'll give you a perfect example. What's her name? Janelle Monáe, right? At the Essence Awards, called some random women up to twerk, and they twerked their behind all over the place. And India Arie actually called that situation out and said, "What the ham sandwich is going on?" You know what I mean? Where do we have any place where there can be some decorum? This is the Essence Fest. You know what I mean? This ain't hip hop 50. It ain't even.
I saw that.
You understand what I mean? So
yes.
If I said what India Arie said, a lot of folk would have. You would have needed crowd control because they would have came at me saying, "Oh, you're just a misogynist," or "Oh, that's that toxic masculinity. You're trying to tell women what to do." What prompts this? That's what we meant by defense mechanism, that you can't say anything, that women are being gaslit, that anything goes, but men are held to a different standard where it's like, you better have a good job, you better be a this, you better be a that. You understand what I mean? That's what we were saying, the imbalance.
So I think first we have to understand that if everybody's adults, then everybody gets to be responsible for whatever they do. Right?
Okay.
Like,
there's no codes anymore.
No one gets to be in charge of anybody else's presentation to the world. You can have your opinions, but I think it's important to understand like what those opinions are rooted in. So respectability politics, right? Respectability politics says, well, if Black people would just, dress up nicely and speak properly and interact in the way that the white world expects them to, then we would have less racism. But that's not true.
Right.
And we know that that's not true. It's the same thing if when a woman is raped or sexually assaulted. Well, if she hadn't had on what she had on, she wouldn't have been sexually assaulted. Well, no, if the person who assaulted them had not assaulted them, she wouldn't have been sexually assaulted. If someone who is enforcing the racist system chooses not to enforce the racist system, that's how racism doesn't happen. It doesn't come from somebody else doing or rising to an expectation. It comes from us recognizing what's truly harmful and managing our own behaviors in ways that are respectful to others. So I can't tell someone else that they're being disrespectful unless they're being disrespectful directly to me. And then I can tell them, hey, when you did this, I I felt this way, right? I can't say, I mean, I could say, oh, she don't need to act like that. That's trifling. I could say that, but that's my value system.
Well, how come we now, and I'm going to say this responsibly. I believe that there should be some form of indifference and some form of affirmation towards elders, towards wisdom, towards even knowing history as far as what works and what didn't. I think that same could be said with children, and the reason why we have guidelines as far as how close you can stand, to a pool or to a train station, not yelling fire in a theater.
Right.
I think that we've lost in the fire of calling it freedom, what our ancestors might have called a rite of passage. You know what I mean? That part of being a community or a village is to call out things that are not, or at least we have found to be harmful. And so I'm lining myself with India Ari and things of that nature. I think that we've gone too far with respect to not having a filter. That's my opinion, and I think I should be able to have my opinion without being called misogynist. Do you understand what I mean? That's what we're saying.
I would say if you don't appreciate being called misogynist, and I would say the same thing about racism, classism, anything. If you find yourself being labeled in that way, I would look into like how that even came about. Like, what does misogyny even mean? Like, what relationship, what power dynamics have occurred that there's this large movement discussing misogyny? Because I would say, by and large, absolutely, this culture is absolutely toxic to women and toxic to non-white people, 100%. And it is usually the people who are in positions of more power that don't see it.
Yeah, I think I'd have to
Right.
agree with that. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you have to look at, why do I feel so strongly about this? And a lot of times it's how we've been taught to see certain things. And I'm not even saying that, I mean, I'm not a fan of people being naked. I don't understand it. I don't, but I do know that when I don't agree with something, that it's far more important for me to understand where that person is coming from before I try and tell them that they're wrong for it.
Gotcha. Yeah. We're going to have to conclude shortly, but I would like to ask you a question, and I can go on. I'm learning quite a bit. Would you be open to coming back on with us again?
Sure, this has been great.
Okay, awesome. Any last words before we conclude here?
I sure would love to. The best thing for people who want society to be better is to learn to treat people, all people, regardless of whether you agree with them, respectfully. And to start with children. Start with allowing children autonomy. Start by giving them respect. Let them give you consent. Things like that. Teaching them to respect other people by respecting them. And that's really where we're going to see the changes that we need.